Hi, it's Ramsey Dewey at the JX Fight Club in Shanghai, China. Today we have a question from Lukito Burrito, cool screen name, who says, "Hey Ramsey, how much time do I need before my first boxing match? Love the videos, by the way." Well, thank you. I appreciate that. Now, as far as that question goes, you might not like how I'm going to term this, but if you have to ask that question, you're not ready. Now, hear me out. First of all, that is something you should be discussing with your coach. And if you don't have a boxing coach, stop right there. Go find yourself a boxing coach. Go train with a boxing camp. Go get with a good gym. And get ready for that fight. And you'll know. You will absolutely know when you're ready. Now, that being said, that is one of the most common questions that I'm asked by people, not on the internet, but in person. People who come to my gym, they'll say, "How long will it take me to be ready for my first fight?" And generally they're talking about MMA, but sometimes they come in to train for a kickboxing match or a Muay Thai fight or a jiu-jitsu tournament or something like that. And they'll say, "How long before I'm ready?" Now, if it's something like a jiu-jitsu tournament, I would say go do as many of those as you can, however prepared or unprepared you feel, because it's fairly low risk. But as far as boxing goes, there are a lot of risks involved. Head trauma, concussions, things like that. Even at the amateur level, even with the headgear on, maybe even especially with the headgear on. So, I had a student named Roy, made a video about him a while back, and he was one of those guys who, how can I put this, had no athleticism whatsoever. When he first came to the gym, he was fat and he was out of shape. He'd never exercised before in his life. He gassed out after 1 minute of a very simple warm-up. And I thought, man, this guy's done. He's never coming back. But he came back consistently every single day, and over the course of several years made a radical changes in his life. And he went from being this fat, out of shape, unathletic person to being a legitimate athletic fighter. And he ended up winning a lot of fights. But the thing is, when Roy wanted to do his first boxing match, he did not ask me for permission. He did not ask me, "Do you think I'm ready?" You know what he did? He went and he signed up for it. And then afterwards he said, "By the way, coach, I'm boxing this weekend. Come watch, please." And I thought, whoa, okay. Now, if he had come to me and said, "Coach, do you think I'm ready?" I would have said, "Nope." Because if you have to ask that question, you're not ready. But Roy went out there, and he knocked his opponent out. Now, I didn't see that coming. Because again, I was still seeing him through the lens of he was this fat, unathletic guy who was completely out of shape and never did a sport in his life and gassed out on 1 minute of the warm-up, even though he had put in the work to win that fight. He had put in many months of training to win that fight, and he did. But if he had asked me, I would have waffled on the answer a bit and said, probably not. But he knew he was ready, and he was, and so he did. Now, one of my fighters, I'm training right now, this guy named Rex, great MMA fighter. He's done about 3 amateur MMA fights so far, undefeated so far. Great athlete, awesome guy. He's preparing for his first boxing match. Now, he didn't ask my permission either, like, "Please, coach, can I do this boxing match?" He told me, "I'm going to do this boxing match." And so my answer was, "Then let's get you ready for it." Now, since I know Rex, I've trained with him, since I've seen him fight, since I know he can handle himself, since I know what his abilities are, I'm not going to step in there and say, "No, this is a terrible idea." So I think you'll do fine. I think you'll do great. Now, we haven't met, you and I. So I have no way to assess your abilities. I have no way to give you an honest answer. Are you ready or not? In 3 months, will you be ready or not? In a year or 2 years, or however long will you be ready? Now, when I lived in the U.S., I ran a small gym there, and I trained MMA fighters. I trained a bunch of guys who became pro fighters, and most of them came from a high school wrestling background. And that's a big deal. With a good, solid high school wrestling background under your belt, the transition to mixed martial arts gets a lot easier than if you don't have that background. And so some of these guys were fighting pro and winning after about 4 months of training. With me, 4 months of mixed martial arts specific training. But if they didn't have that wrestling background, there's no way they would have been ready in 4 months. Now, I don't know what your athletic background is. You do. Okay? So, again, this is one of those things you got to talk to your coach with. But at the same time, it's something you have to want to do. Now ask yourself, do I feel ready today? If I got into a boxing match today with somebody who is at least as good as I am, at least as good of an athlete as I am, at least as fast, at least as strong as I am. Basically, if you were fighting another version of yourself out there, who wins that fight? What happens? What's the result? How much damage do you take? Do you walk away from that fight healthy? Do you walk away from that fight accomplishing your goals? You also have to ask, what's your goal? Is your goal win that fight? Is your goal just survive that fight? Is your goal dominate that fight and break your opposition at every level? Is your goal one fight leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to the next, leading to a career? Because all of those factors factor in. Now, if it's a one and done thing, a lot of people do that, man. There's this boxing gym here in Shanghai, and they run this really sketchy event that I'm not a big fan of. They call it a white-collar boxing event, where they get these schlubs off the street and give them a couple months of training. They don't spar at all, as far as I'm aware. And then they throw them in a boxing ring in front of a crowd and have them flail at each other for a few minutes. And they gas out, and it's ugly, and it's a mess, but they have fun. And none of these guys have the aspiration of becoming a career boxer or a professional fighter. They just think, I want to get in there, cross it off the bucket list. So you have to ask yourself, what are your goals with boxing? Do you want longevity in the sport, or are you going to be one of those one and done guys? And boxing is a fascinating sport to me as a mixed martial arts coach, because it's simple, but it's not. And it's definitely not easy. I think boxing is one of the most difficult combat sports to master. I mean, it's one of the easiest to grasp the idea of, but one of the most difficult to master the reality of. Now, for your first boxing match, you don't need to be a master of boxing. If there is a good matchmaker, and hopefully there is, they'll set you up against somebody with comparable experience. So, if you're going to do a self-evaluation, ask yourself a few questions. What happens when you spar in the gym? What happens when you spar with people who are at your same level? How is that different than when you spar with the new guys who don't know anything? How's that different than when you spar with the more experienced boxers who can school you, who can smash you? And what would happen if the matchmaker set you up with a skill difference like that in the fight? Are you prepared for that? Can you survive that? Again, there are a lot of variables that go into this, so I'm not going to tell you 3-4 months, but at least get 3 or 4 months of training in, though. At least. But I don't know, man. I've seen so many people at different levels. Nobody starts out at the same level in different athletic endeavors. Man, there was one girl I trained, she came in for private lessons, and she was just an absolute natural with leg locks. She just picked up leg locks like a fish to water. And I would have bet money on her leg locking most people. But, her boxing was so-so. Her boxing was as good as you would expect it to be for somebody who had put in the amount of time at boxing as she did. But those leg locks off the charts. On the other hand, there was this Brazilian kid named Arthur that I trained, and he came in the gym and he was pretty raw, but he was a natural athletic talent at his fists finding their place in people's faces. And he just had a natural proclivity for that. Now, natural talent doesn't mean you don't need to train. It just means you start out with a little bit of an advantage. And if you train, that can turn into a much larger advantage in the long run. But if you don't train, you don't go anywhere. Man. So, what are your athletic proclivities? Right? A good checklist. Jack Dempsey's book, Championship Fighting. Explosive punching and aggressive defense. Again, Championship Fighting by Jack Dempsey. Look that book up. Read it. Read the first chapter. And Jack Dempsey gives a list of like a dozen things that he feels that modern boxers and boxing coaches and boxing gyms are doing wrong. And if you don't know what he's talking about, you're not ready. So study that book. Figure out what Jack Dempsey is talking about, what everybody's doing wrong, fix that stuff, do it right. And then you are on the path to being ready yourself. But ultimately, you got to want it. You got to make that choice. So thank you for watching. Now get out there and train.